Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
All right, everyone, it's PWA time. We have someone special lined up for you. My fellow Dutchman, Rowdy, is coming up in a minute to talk about the fundamentals of PWAs. But before we start with Rowdy, I wanted to remind you that we have a lot of other things to do besides the talk. So that you look at the giveaways, at the expo, at all the other things that are available to do here today and tomorrow. You can just click on the menu after Rowdy's talk when we have this 15-minute break to check out all the activities that we have lined up for you. Now, as I mentioned, Rowdy will be talking about the fundamentals of PWA. We'll be putting the fun in fundamentals. Rowdy is working at Nationale-Nederlanden, a Dutch insurance company, but he is a speaker that goes all around the world to talk about, well, front-end topics. Besides that, he's a big Formula One fan, and he loves everything that has to do with superhero movies. And you'll see something about that in his presentation also with one of my favorite superhero movies. So let's give Rowdy a big round of applause. Rowdy, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, and good morning. Welcome to, well, this online talk. Unfortunately, because Corona is still a threat, right? I got my first shot, got the next one next week, but I hope you're safe as well, and we can meet in the future again. As mentioned, my name is Rowdy, and I was born and raised in the Netherlands, in Gouda. And I'm a freelance web and app developer and also work, as mentioned, at the big insurance company in the Netherlands, Nationale-Nederlanden.
Rowdy, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You're sharing your speaker presentation.
I was afraid of that. Hold on.
Yeah. All right.
But you can read along then.
Yeah, we get a preview from the next slide already then.
That's not what we want.
Fixing technical difficulties, it's part of life. Part of life.
It's being... let's see if that works. There we go.
Yeah.
So that's better, right?
Yeah. So let's start again. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks. So yeah, senior engineer at Nationale-Nederlanden. You can follow me and hassle me on Twitter if you have any more questions after this talk at Rowdy Rabau. And as mentioned, I love superhero movies. My girlfriend is a little bit into it as well. She finds it entertaining, and she comes along. And she told me lately that I look more and more like Thor nowadays. So that's great, I thought. But then I realized it was after the Endgame movie. So little Corona kilos there. Okay, let's talk about PWAs. There's a lot of code in this talk. But the slides and demo code will be available afterwards, so it's not necessary to write things down. Just sit back, relax, and try to follow along. PWA stands for Progressive Web App. It doesn't really have to be an app. It can also be just a normal website. So I'm going to talk about the fundamentals. We start from the beginning, so I have a good understanding on how PWA works. PWAs are supposed to be reliable. So they should always load and never show the so-called dinosaur. I will show a little bit later what that is. They're supposed to be fast. They should respond quickly to user interactions, and they should be engaging as well. They kind of can feel like a native app or act like a native app. So let's start with some key features about PWAs. They are linkable because they're just plain URLs like a website. So that's cool. It's not a native app. They're safe. They only work if you're running on HTTPS with a proper certificate. Well, that's what we should do anyway, right? Nowadays. They're discoverable because there are just websites on URLs. They can be indexed by Google and other search engines. they are responsive. Well, every website nowadays should be, right? They feel like a native app. That means they're fast loading and they could have a look and feel like a native app, but it's not mandatory. They are always up to date because they're fresh from the web. You don't have to download a new version from the App Store. They are installable. That means you can put an icon and link on your home screen to start it from your mobile device. But it's also like caching data, and that's something I'm gonna dig into really a lot. They are re-engageable, so that means the home screen again, it's right on the device, and also the use of push notifications is available. But be careful about that, because push notification can be very intrusive. Only use it when it's useful. Maybe if you're running a weather website and you want to send weather alerts, for instance, that's a good way to use push notifications. And also they are connectivity independent, so they can work offline. Well, you've probably seen this website, right? Well, let's see what happens if we go offline. So I go to the network tab here, select offline, and reload the page. Yeah, there's no internet, Dutch for no internet. So what can we do? Well, we can play with the dinosaur. That's fun and games for a little bit, but this is not the really experience you want to give users, right? You want them to be able to still see the website, even though they are offline. Okay, let's start with some starter code on which we will base our PWA. I created a very simple HTML file with some styling, an image, and an H1 that says PWA Superheroes. Nothing fancy here. And it looks like this. One of the things PWA requires is a manifest file. So let's talk about that. What is a manifest file? A manifest file is a simple JSON file. It's easy to read. It's easy to change. And what does it do? It informs the browser about your web application. And it tells the browser as well how it should behave when it's, say, installed on your machine. And how does that look? Well, here are some examples you can use in the JSON file. So you have a name that will be shown on a generated splash screen if you open it as from the home screen. A short name of the application that will be shown beneath the icon of your app. The default language, the start URL, so which page should be loaded. In this case, it's the root. You can also add a scope, so which pages are included in this PWA, and the point or the dot means all of them. And there are some display options, standalone, full screen, or browser. You should use standalone or full screen because that really makes it looks like an app if it's installed on a device. If you use browser, it's just like a normal website. You can force the orientation, either portrait or landscape. And you can set some colors, like the background color for loading and the splash screen, and the theme color that I will show it later, that takes the color of the top bar in the task switcher on your device. And you also need to provide some icons. Well, I'll get back to that a little bit later. So to use this manifest file, just like in the CSS file or a JavaScript file, you need to edit. And you do that with link rel is manifest. And we go back to the screen and let's see how that works. We now have a manifest file, and if I go to application manifest, you can see there is a manifest file. But it says the manifest does not contain a suitable icon. Well, let's create those icons. Let's work on that. But you don't want to make all those icons by yourself, by hand, because that's a lot of work. So for this, you can use, for instance, the PWA asset generator, and that's what I did. So you run the script. In this case, I created a script called generate, and this will use my SVG to create the icons, and it will generate multiple versions, also the Apple Touch icons if you want to use those. And when it's done, it will also update my HTML and my manifest file. So we're almost done, I think. It's saving the Apple files. And we're done. And you can see that the icons are added to my manifest file and the index files. The Apple Touch icons are also added there. And there's a lot. You can see here all the generated files or changed files. So this is what we saw, right? The icons are added to the manifest file. And if we then go to the manifest file again, you can see that the images are now there. Don't think they're transparent, by the way. Let me switch to a dark theme, and then you can see there are still white squares. So we have our icons now. It says there's no matching service worker detected, but we'll work on that later. Let's go to the next step. Let's go to H2HS, which means add to home screen. We want to add an icon with a link to your website or application on your home screen, just like you have on a native app. Well, there are some criteria you need to adhere to. The web app shouldn't be installed yet. Well, that makes sense, right? Doesn't really help. It needs to be served over HTTP as well. We already did that. You need to have a manifest file. We created that. That's cool. And that manifest file at least needs to have a short name or a name, a start URL, and the display must be full screen, standalone, or minimal UI. Don't use browser because it won't install, because it's just like running it in a browser. Those icons need to be there. And again, about service worker, they need to be a registered service worker with a fetch event handler. Don't worry, I'll get to that. Now, how that looks. This is the application on Chrome on an Android device. If you go to the three dots on top and you click that, you can choose for add to home screen. And if you do that, Android will give you this default interaction saying, well, do you want to add it or not? And if you do that, here it is. There is a PWA application now on the home screen, and the square image is rounded, but just that's done by the operating system itself. And if you start it, you get a splash screen for free. You don't have to do anything for it. It uses the color you described and the long name in this case, and the icon, of course. And there is your application. You don't see the browser UI anymore. It's just like a normal native application. And if you go to the task switcher, you can see that the icon is on top there as well. If you look at Firefox, for instance, on Android, it will provide this already by itself. It will detect you have a manifest file and say, well, hey, you can easily add this website to your home screen. Do you want to? And you can do that by pressing the home icon there. And then you get the dialog from Firefox to do it. But that's all manual, right? That's not what we want to tell the user to do. Click there, do this, do that. So we can do that in a user-friendly way. And we can do that by using the before install prompt event. Unfortunately, this only works on Chrome, Edge, Opera, and Samsung Internet. Firefox and Safari don't support this yet. I'm not sure when they will support it, but you have to keep that in mind. So usually, Chrome on Android will show this banner on the bottom of the screen after you use the website for a bit. And it's a bit strange. It's like, what is this? Do you want to send me push notifications or what? I don't understand. It might be, hey, I just met you and this is crazy. So this might scare people. So, right, what is this? Let's change that a bit. It probably would be better if to have a menu option or a button yourself that you can show whenever you want to and style it in the way you want to. So I created a HTML file earlier, and now I add a button that says add to home screen. I have some CSS there to make it a little bit nicer and to make it to hide it first and make it be able to show it later. And I create a new JavaScript file called h2hs. For instance, you can call it any way you want. And what are we doing here? We're going to listen to the before install prompt event. And if that's fired, we prevent it from showing the default dialog from the operating system. That's the event prevent default. We want to use that event later on. So we hook it up to our deferred prompt variable. But we now can show our button because it is available. And on that button, we put an event listener to listen to a click on it. If people click on that button, we want to show them our add to scroll. Want them to show the add to home screen prompt, the default one from the operating system. So with the event listener, if they click we show the native dialog, and a user can either dismiss or accept it. That's the deferred prompt.user choice. In this case, I just console log it, what happens. But you can imagine you can also add some code to put it in your analytics software to see whether people want to install it or don't. And after and if they have added to the home screen, there's no need to show the button anymore. So we remove that. And how that looks. Now you can see the before install prompt is fired here, and now I show my own button, and if I click on it, we get the native dialog to save it to our home screen. And this is Chrome on the desktop. Did you see that? This is not a mobile device. This is my Mac. And what's cool about it is that you now can install PWAs also on your Mac or PC. So if I go to my Launchpad, you can see PWA Superheroes is there as well now. And if I start it, I get a browser-free application. Cool, right? So let's talk about the next part, the service workers that were mentioned before already. They're really the kings of PWAs, I must say. And what is a service worker? A service worker is just a plain JavaScript file. It runs in the background in a separate thread, so it's not blocking for your website or application, but it is still scoped to your website. But it doesn't have access, so it can't modify the page, it can't access the DOM. And it works asynchronous, so you have to use promises or async await, and it's event-driven. You can think of it like a man in the middle. But a man in the middle is not what we want, right? An attacker can intercept your communication, for instance, and do weird stuff, like when you're connected to an unprotected public Wi-Fi, for instance. But it is kind of man in the middle, and I like to call it a marvel in the middle, because it's a good one. It will intercept your connection to the internet, to the server, in a good way. So let's see how we work here. We have two events. Install, that's when it's installing, and deactivate, when it's activating. So install is like there's a service worker available for you, and activate will make sure it runs. So we need to have this code, first of all, to see it working. Then in my app.js, I have to check for modern browsers, just to be sure. IE 11 is still around and it doesn't support it, so just make sure you check for a modern browser. And what we want to do there is register the service worker. And if it works, we just log it here to be sure what we see is happening. And in my JavaScript or in my HTML file, I need to add this JavaScript file as well. I include the app.js file here, but I don't have to include the service worker file because that's handled by the app.js file. Because we registered it here. Okay, let's see what happens here. It says there is no matching service worker, but let's reload. Okay, it doesn't say there's no matching service worker anymore because there is, but it did say page does not work offline. Let's work on that, right? We have a service worker now, and you can see it's registered here and activated. Okay. To be able to work offline, we need to use something called the cache API. We want to set them locally to use them later on, maybe when there's no internet connection available. So the service worker is installed, but if I refresh the page, nothing really happens because we don't use it yet. It's all loaded from the server here. So let's work on that and add some stuff to the service worker. And what we do here is we want to add these files to a cache so we can use them later on. And you can see I add a lot of files here to the cache. We can do that a little bit better and manageable. So I give it a version number here, static v1, and I have an array of files that I want to store in the cache. I open the cache, and when the cache is opened, I add them all. So reload the page and see what happens. You can see there's a service worker there also waiting to be activated. We do that later, but now you can see that the files are in the cache. Great, we have the files, but we're not using it yet. As I mentioned, you can see here the service worker needs to be activated. We do it manually now by clicking this link, but later on I will show you how we can do it automatically or have the user act on it. Okay, let's fetch some data from that cache and use it in our website using the fetch API. So the service worker installed, but as mentioned, if you run it, it's still coming from the website, the server. So we're going to create an event listener for the fetch event, because in this event, we will look at our caches, see if there is a match of that file, and return it. If it's there, you can see if it matches and there is a response, we return it from the cache, and otherwise we still get it from the server. We still get it from the internet. This will speed things up. Let's see how that works. We have a new service worker. I skip waiting. And if I clear out the network here and refresh, you can see it's all coming from the service worker in the size column. That's great. But did you also see the load time? Because we want speed. This is from the server, and keep in mind it's my local host and my local machine, and that took 145 milliseconds. That's already pretty fast, but it's my computer. But if we use the service worker again on my own computer, it's only 59 milliseconds. So that really makes a big difference already on my local machine. But we could cache a lot of stuff because we give our caches a version number. And if we change stuff, we get cache on cache on cache. So let's clean that up a little bit. Let's say I add a new page called about.html. And that HTML is pretty simple, just a little text. and a link to my website. Sorry. So in my service worker, I create a static v2. I change the version number. Otherwise, nothing will happen. It won't see there is a new service worker, and it doesn't know what to do. So in the cache storage, we now have a v2 as well. But if we reload the page now, we have no idea which indexed HTML file, so the homepage file, will be loaded. Will it be this one, or will it be the one that will it be the one with or without the link to our about page? So we need to clean this up a little bit to make sure you always get the right one. So that's what we do here. We check the caches on the keys, and the keys is the version number in this case. And if it's not the same version number, we just delete the old cache. So we always have the proper cache file. And it's nice if you have a website with just a few files, so you can add all those files to the static cache. But a website can grow pretty big, right? So let's do some dynamic caching. So I introduced a concept called dynamic cache with dynamic v1. And I have to update the static as well to v3 because I forgot the h2hs.js file earlier. Okay, a few minutes ago we had this code. When a file is not in the cache, we retrieve it from the server, from the internet. But what we do as well now, if we do this, if we get it from the internet, we open the dynamic cache and save that file as well there, so we can use it later on. Keep in mind that you have to clone the result, so rest.clone, because you can only use this result of that fetch once. So we want to use it to save to the database or to our cache, but also serve it to the user. So we have to clone it. Okay, we already had this piece of cleanup for the static cache, but maybe we should clean up the dynamic cache as well, right? So just add this. And now it will also clean the dynamic caches. Okay. Let's run this. So we have a static cache v3, a v2, and now also a v3. We skip the waiting. Now only we have version 3. I go to the about page. And now you can see it's stored not in static v3. There is the h2hs file we forgot, but in the dynamic cache, there's now the about page. Great. So if we would reload this page, it now would be served from the cache and not from the internet anymore. That's all fun and games, but what if we are offline or temporary offline because the Wi-Fi drops or the network has a hiccup? So let's see if I didn't cache the about HTML file yet and go there.
Je moet eerst je iPhone ontgrendelen.
So I click the about page and it says, well, deze site is niet bereikbaar. That's Dutch for it's not available. That's not a good user experience, right? So let's do something about that. Let's create an offline page. Sorry, this page is not cached yet. We want to have that offline HTML file in our static cache. We want to have it always. So we add it to the file collection and also pump the version number, of course. This code we have, but what if it doesn't work? If the fetch event request gets an error? So we add a .catch here to catch those errors. And if we get an error, we grab the offline HTML from our static cache. But what if we are missing a JavaScript file or CSS file, an image? We don't want to serve an HTML file, right? So let's add a little bit of sniffing to the header, saying, well, if it's text to HTML, then we only show the offline HTML file. And again, let's see how that works. We skip the waiting. We see that the offline HTML file is in our cache. And we make sure we are offline. And go to the About page. And you can see that's better than the browser error, right? Okay, next up is the application shell. We said it could look like a native application. So what is an application shell? Well, for instance, this is an older version of the Facebook native app. And you can see things are going, there's something going on there. If you have a slow connection, you first get this, and then everything will be filled up later. But by showing this, you already have a feeling of like, well, it's kind of fast. I see stuff. And we can do the same in our app. For this, I've placed some divs with placeholder classes. And I have some CSS to make a little animation to suggest that it's fast, to perceive it's fast. And also for the image, I have a placeholder. I need to update my static cache version number because otherwise the browser won't load the new index.html file. Keep that in mind. If you change something in the files that are in the static cache, update your version. So if we run this, and we reload the page, you can see, hey, something is going on. It's like something is really fast. You have a perceived feeling of speed. It's not pretty, but it does the trick now. And we want to fill those placeholders with some dynamic data from a third-party API endpoint. So for instance, I took the Superhero API endpoint. And what I do here now, I have a function called update UI. I fetch this specific data from the API, and then I want to update my UI with it. This update UI function isn't pretty and probably can be improved on, but for this demo, it serves its purposes. We just want to replace the placeholders with actual data. So I create an api.js file for this. I need to include it in my HTML. However, I don't want to run it immediately. I first want to load everything else and then just fill in. So I use the attribute defer here. Again, I update the version number and include this api.js file in my static cache. And let's see how that works. So you have a static v6, version 6 now. And if we reload, we get data from the API. And you can see that dynamic v1 is there. And if we look at it, you can see we have the result of the API call, including the image. Well, it's a best practice not to store that dynamic data from the API, like a JSON response, in the cache. We have something else for that, and that's called IndexedDB. That's way more effective. It can be a little tricky, though, but let's dive a little bit into this. What is IndexedDB? It's a asynchronous transactional key value database in the browser. And as I said, typically for JSON format. And transactional means that if something goes wrong with one operation, it won't destroy your database. So that's good. Because it's not so easy to use out of the box, in this example, I use IDB from Jake Archibald that has a nice package for it. And it mirrors the IndexedDB API, but with small improvements and promises to make it easier to use. So in my HTML file, I'm going to include idbs.js, and I write a little utils file. In my service worker, I want to use the power of this, so I have to import it. Both scripts, I import both scripts and add it to my static cache again. And of course, bump the version. So in my utils, I now have defined, say, a database name, a database version, and a database store. That's more or less like a table. Also, the API URL is here. And I open the database, and if it's opened, I get access to it and I can create a store with the index on the ID of the JSON file I get returned from the API. So I want to be able to write data to it, and you do it like this. You start a transaction in read-write mode. You get the proper store name, and you put your data in there. I want to be able to clear all the data. Normally, in production, you wouldn't clear everything, maybe only a few based on an ID or something, but for the demo, it's fine. So I call store.clear here. And I want to be able to read all the data. Usually, you would read based on an ID, but because there's only one thing in the IndexedDB database in this demo, I can read everything. So if we get to the service worker, we need to change it as well. Because now only users are static and dynamic cache, not the IndexedDB right now. So we first clear the database and then insert the data we get from the JSON API. And of course, we want to also use the data from the API endpoint from the IndexedDB. So we changed our API network, API.js a little bit, because we want to we want to retrieve the data from the API endpoint, but if it's already in our IndexedDB, we want to show it before it's getting called from the server. So that's why I have a network data received property here, or variable. So what we do, if we don't have it fetched yet from the internet, we get it from the cache, and we update the UI. So let's see how that works also. So we skip the waiting again. The old static cache is deleted. And if we refresh, you can see there's no data from the cache, and it's retrieved from the web. The UI is updated by the web, and we have written it to the cache. And if you go to the IndexedDB, you can see that there is a JSON response there. Great, we have saved it, but we haven't used it yet. So if we go back here, refresh it, you can see it's retrieved from the cache first. The UI is updated by the cache. We retrieved it from the web afterwards, updated the UI again. Maybe there are some little changes, and we stored it again in our cache. Great. But that skip waiting is annoying, right? So what we can do is show a little notification to the user that a new version is available. For that, I just used a little div saying there's a new version available, and I add that to my static cache. Of course, it needs to be V8 now because I updated the HTML file, and the application can send a message containing the action skip waiting to execute that for us. So it will replace my manual action. So if there is a new version, you can click on it, and this click will send this to the service worker. And we listen to an event called update found, and when it's found, we will listen to the state change. And we only want to do something when the state has become installed. And when it's installed, we will show that update bar. So when a user clicks on it, the message skip waiting is sent, and this will also trigger the control change event. So we need to listen to this as well. And if that's triggered, then we can reload the page for the user to see the new data. So finally, how does that look? So you can see now, hey, there's a new version available. And if you click it, we reload it, and you're done. You're using the new version. That's very nice, right? You can also use it, of course, for information about the new version. You can also do this automatically without showing a bar, but that's a story for another time. So at the end, this is the fundamentals of PWA, but have you ever heard of Workbox? Everything I told you up to now, Workbox has an easy solution for you. But I wanted to show you the basics first before you start using Workbox. But it's great. It's a set of libraries and node modules that make it easy to cache assets and take full advantage of the features of PWA. So with that, I'm at the end. I want to say thank you very much for attending. The slides and code is available through these URLs. And I think we have some time left for questions. So I'm eager to hear from you.
Yeah,
thank you.
We're going to jump right into them because we only have a few minutes. The first question is from Stefan, and he's asking, how do you test PWA in dev mode, like localhost and without certificates for HTTPS?
That's the beauty. Localhost doesn't need a certificate.
Easy peasy. So you just test on localhost. Okay, cool. Next question is from Tobias. Do you think PWAs are the right use case for browsers? Have you ever seen the correct way of updating a server worker? And does this look natural to you? In my opinion, this looks like a hack. And we are right now bending the browser to be capable of doing PWA features, which is, in my opinion, not the way we should go with browsers.
Okay. You're entitled to your opinion, definitely. I think we should make use of the good things. I'm not sure if it's gonna replace a native app completely, but like this caching strategy, in my opinion, is really nice to give a great user experience. I can agree that not everything should be done in PWAs, but yeah, use it there where it's suitable for you.
With great power.
Yeah, come great responsibilities, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Jeremy Keith, and that's the last question we have time for. So just about every website can benefit from being a progressive web app, at least having a service worker and web app manifest file. So why aren't most websites today progressive web apps? What's stopping people?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if this is Jeremy Keith, great book, by the way. I think many people see it like a replacement for a native app. But we have a website. We don't need an app. Mm-hmm. But as I showed here, caching strategies make it really worthwhile to create a PWA of your website. You don't need to use all kinds of fancy stuff around it. But I think we need to promote it a little bit more. PWA support on iOS is a little bit meh, but they do support service workers, so you can still use that. Maybe not other stuff, but you can use the caching, for instance. That's what I can say about it.
My personal take is that PWAs is not like an owned technology by a company that's pushing it. It's people like you doing the hard work, pushing the technology, right? So there's not like a company advertising it. There's no budget for this. So yeah. You are the DevRel person.
Yeah. Google is pushing all their things they're doing for the web, but somehow PWA doesn't get that much attention yet. That's a shame, but I do my best.
Yeah, well, thanks for spreading the love, Rowdy. It's been a pleasure watching you. Unfortunately, there's no more time, But there are a lot more questions on SwapGuard. So if you have the time, would you log into SwapGuard and check the chat for the rest of the questions? That would be great.
Yes, I will. I see it on my mobile phone here. I see a lot of things coming around, so I'll answer them immediately.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have. As I mentioned, we have a 15-minute break now, and see you back in the next session. Bye-bye.
As a developer, or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.